Hello, hello. We're back with another budget-themed video today, this time talking about pre-constructed decks, and primarily that means challenger decks in Universus. Challenger decks are in a bit of a interesting spot when it comes to a newer or a budget-minded player. You know, on the one hand, for 35 MSRP, usually you can find them for 30. You get a pre-built deck that you can shuffle up and play. That's very handy, very attractive. These are not top tier competitive, but they're generally respectable enough that you can play them at locals and you're not going to get like completely lammed out of the room. So that's very appealing. And then, you know, also of course you have the cards afterwards that you can put into other decks. You know, on the flip side, they are, you know, $30 for a pre-constructed deck. You're not going to use all the cards in them and other things and so on and so forth, but it's kind of a 50-cent per card kind of rate, and a lot of these cards aren't really available as singles because there aren't too many people opening these to sell them as singles. So in some cases, it's the best way to get certain cards. So they're in a bit of a mixed bag kind of place. They're pretty budget, but they're not super budget in terms of upgrading your collection. If you go directly for singles for a very specific deck, you can usually do a little bit better than just hunting challenger decks. But in the broad sense, people like to ask, you know, which challenger deck should I get? I'm just starting out. You know, what's sort of a good buy? What's going to, you know, maybe be a good deck for me to play, or at least leave me with some good useful cards to work with afterwards. And I'm going to be mostly focusing on the second part here. So you know, first and foremost, if there's a character in these that you want to play, just get that deck. Even if it's not on this list, if it's a character that you want to play from an IP that you like, just go ahead and get that deck. It's going to be built around the character. It should be fine, you know, at least if it's a challenger deck. Some of the starter decks are pretty iffy, but the challenger decks, at the very least, you can go ahead and get those decks. They'll work well enough, and you can worry about how much the cards are useful in other things later or not at all. You can just keep working on upgrading that deck if you want, for instance. But for this video's purposes, I'm thinking about how useful these cards are going to be for other decks in the future, for, you know, plugging and playing and adding to your collection and having around. You know, again, with sort of a budget mindset. You know, we're not just counting meta staples here. Pretty much anything that can be respectable, help you win games, you know, fill a good general purpose role in your deck is going to count. I kind of just did a loose, very quick run through the cards and give them like a 1, 2, or 3, or 0 points, depending on how useful and or niche I think they are, and kind of rated them loosely that way. Secondly, if there is something specific you have in mind, like a deck that you are working on and you're trying to find a challenger that, like, yes, you can play a little bit, but also that can feed some deck that you're working on, make sure to pay attention to the symbols. You know, each deck's going to be built off of certain symbols. Some of the newer ones are doing a lot of attuned stuff, but a lot of the older ones have non-attuned symbols, which means your deck has to, you know, primary symbol a certain one in question if you want to use everything in a precon. So pay attention to that. And thirdly, just FYI, cards come in 2 to 4 copies in these decks. You don't have to feel super pressured to get a second copy of any of these decks, certainly not right out of the gate. You know, some of the 2Xs will be cards that you end up wanting 3 or 4 of in, you know, like a fine-tuned constructed deck, but for the purposes of just building out your collection, you're not going to get too much value out of picking up a second copy of these challengers unless you know for sure that you really want a couple extra copies of that big, you know, shiny, quote-unquote ultra-rare silver-bordered type of card in these things. And the last note not on here, I did not include the 2023 decks because those are rotating in 6-ish months as of recording, and maybe even less than that by the time you view this. So I left those out of here, but just as a quick note, if you are down to get some of those, then I would say the Toga no Chako decks, the Clash decks from My Hero Academia Jetburn, are both pretty good buys towards that end. And Overhaul's like, okay, I wouldn't get the Mirio deck unless you want to play Mirio. Off the top of my head, I think those are the 4 decks from that year. So without further ado, going into the top 10. This is 10 out of like 18 or 20 or something like that. So it's not the most competitive top 10 in the world, but it is a countdown of sorts. Number 10, we have Solo Leveling. So Solo Leveling gets a bit of a bad rap because the character kind of takes a little time to get going, so it's considered one of the weaker decks. He has a lot of cards in this deck that are just not good, quite frankly, but the good ones are pretty good and pretty generically useful, and we have 6 of them profiled here. There's like 1 or 2 other ones that are good or good in the right niche, but Teleportation Stone is a nice handy block trick that can, you know, buy you a turn, slow your opponent down from trying to smash your face in. Got a couple nice useful 1 difficulty attacks, 1 difficulty foundations rather, a couple nice useful 5 difficulty attacks. And Loot Box is a bit of a dopamine hit. It's not bad to just slow in your deck. It is a little weird and a little hard to wrap your mind around the actual value of it, but it's a pretty good card all told. So that is a all death and life attuned symbol mix you're getting there. I'd say the all symbol stuff makes out the best, which you can see just kind of looking at this profile here, but you are going to get some death and life cards in there as well. Next up, we have MightyNine from the Critical Role Challengers series from early in 2024. This deck is using classic symbols. All the cards will have chaos, and then around half the cards each will have 4 other symbols: death, life, fire, and void. This deck has a lot of spell-themed stuff in it. You know, so if you're looking to build a Critical Role booster set character, or perhaps if there's some kind of upcoming Bell's Hells release we don't presently know about, it could be useful for that. But just in general, even outside of the spell stuff, a lot of the cards here are just very, very good. Knott's Flask is so good it's been errata to be unique. Wound Restore is a great action. Big Freaking Explosions are really good. Late game scaling attack to just find a lot of damage. A lot of budget players just need damage, and Big Freaking Explosion does damage for sure. Button Collector, a very nice rated way to get some extra cards. Trickster's Blessing is a handy trick. Targeting Blast is kind of a nice, useful value attack, has powerful 2 on it, is a little bit annoying to block or not block, get a couple speed after it. Not a big deal, but kind of a neat role player, has 3 keywords on it, kind of handy. And there's a few other cards like that are just like, okay, you can put them in the deck, they'll be respectable. Not the deepest pile of cards in this deck, but the good ones are really, really good. Next up at number 8, we have King Gdora. So the Godzilla Challenger decks are generally regarded to have the strongest characters in them, the raw character cards that are in these decks. The decks themselves are good. They are not, you know, particularly overwhelming compared to, you know, everything else on this list, really. So we put King Gdora at number 8. The big bomb here is Tri-Gravity Beam. That is a very popular competitive card. Just being able to look at your opponent's hand and take a card away from it is an extremely strong ability. It does have a way to give itself a little bit of a damage. You might play a deck that gives it more damage than that, or you just have a move that's coming after it. That's a big deal. So that's a big move. That's sort of the big get in this deck, but a lot of the other cards around it aren't too bad. Monster Zero is a perfectly acceptable way to try to close out a game. Strip a card from their hand can be a huge deal, and sometimes you'll get 3 damage on it. We have a 0 difficulty foundation with text, which is nice. Golden Death is a neat way to dig for some extra attacks, and it's got a couple nice 1 difficulty foundations here as well. This is a void symbol deck with a spattering of air, all, death, and evil. A lot of these cards in these decks are specifically removed from game themed, so if you're playing a character that is dealing with that stuff, this can be a good pickup for a number of cards that aren't listed here because they are kind of niche towards the remove theme, but if you're on the remove theme, they're very good. Number 7, we have Godzilla, the other Godzilla deck. This is the Godzilla and Mothra deck. It is built off of the Earth symbol, has some air, chaos, good, and water. This deck has a lot of play 5 difficulty attack themes, which is a little bit easier to build into. City Rampage is a popular card. That is a build around that people will slam for City Rampage in a deck and a bunch of 5 difficulty attacks and try to make it work. But the attacks themselves are not too bad in this deck. Smashing Stomp and Electric Moth are the most widely played ones, but there's a couple others that are pretty good in the right deck. Shobijin's Message is a very, very good 1 difficulty foundation. And then we have Ferocious Attacker, History's Greatest Monster. Those are good. There's a couple other pretty nice ones. This is a pretty good, well-rounded deck. Again, if you're building off of Earth, you'll have access to all of these cards. If not, you'll get some good cards for Chaos and Water. The Godzilla-themed cards will have Chaos and Water. Air and Good will be on the Mothra-themed cards. A number of pretty good ones in this deck. This deck is pretty solid overall. Number 6, Cowboy Bbop, the Spike Spiegel and Faye Valentine deck. This is a bit of a surprise maybe to some people. This is one of the first, might have been the first Challenger series they produced. And they kind of reprinted some cards in here, but they reprinted some good ones. Some ones that are, that currently see a lot of play. And it's not the deepest list of cards. There's a couple that are not that great in here, but there's a lot of good ones that are just good solid cards you can put in all sorts of decks. A bunch of 4 difficulty attacks that are good. Jaw Jammer can be an 8 damage throw, High Roundhouse Kick can be a 9 damage kick with a momentum, Falling Heel Strike, unflipping a foundation is as good as your flip costs. Leaving the Bbop can go and fetch you attack. Fast Friendship sees tons of play as a nice speed hate. 1 diff Foundation Syndicate Target seems tons of play as a 0 diff that does not have text, but has a very spicy 0 low block and 6 check. So Cowboy Bbop deck, pretty good pickup for the Death, Life, and Water symbols. I believe every card on here has Life and Water, and then a bunch of them have Death, but as you can see, they have some spattering of other symbols besides Death as well. Some Chaos, a little bit of All, and so on and so forth. Number 5, the Ryu and Luke, the brand new Street Fighter Challenger Series Ryu Luke deck. This deck has a lot of good ones. A lot of the stuff not featured here is at least decent, but the big gets, Pale Rider, Rising Uppercut, both very good attacks. Vagrant Truth Seeker is a solid, we call them Omni Blocks, it'll fix its own zone. My Fist's another, speed hate 1 diff, a little both narrow because it only works on really fast attacks that are really fast out of the gate, but there's also, it can be the only way to deal with some of those attacks in some cases that's really super effective. So that's a pretty handy one. Unending Path is a good one. Battle Holds the Answer can set up a 6 check for you. And then a number of cards not shown that are, again, at least okay and decent and can go in your deck and do a good job. This is an all and fire attuned deck, so everything in here will either be all attuned or fire attuned. You can see most of the cards featured are all attuned, but they're not too bad on the fire side either. But this is a pretty good pickup. I don't think there's any keyword themes in this one that I can think of. The character Ryu himself wants expressly non-weapon, non-tech attacks, so they won't see any weapon or tech attacks in here, but I don't think there's a lot of stuff here that specifically calls out punches or whatnot. And then number 4, the other Street Fighter Challenger deck. ChunLi and Jamie. This is going to be air and water attuned symbols. This will have a keyword focus on kicks. I only showed off one of the cards here in Hate's Lectures. There's a number of other ones where if you are willing to run a, not entirely kicks, but at least like a lot of kicks deck, then there's a couple other cards in here that are really, really good, but like kind of niche in that sense. Guardian Angel of Chinatown is just a huge, huge piece. Damage reduction. Decks that really go hard in damage reduction can be very hard to deal with, especially on a budget, and Chinatown can help with those a fair bit. Street Hero is a very good way to, keep blocking a long attack string. A bunch of decent attacks. None of the attacks in here are as big of a deal as some of the ones in the Ryu and Luke deck, but some pretty good ones that'll go in your deck and they can do some work on a budget, for a newer player, especially if you're looking for ways to lean into that kick theme. There's some decent ones on here. In number 3, Dark Hero Deku. This is another one that might surprise people. This deck is known for leaning really hard into this Vestige theme and also a face-down cards in your card pool theme. And, some of those cards feel a little bit narrow, but really when you step back and look at them, a lot of these cards are just good. Every card in this deck is going to have the life symbol, back to classic symbols for these, and there's going to be a spattering of air, void, good, and water. I would say air and void probably make out the best. It's hard to say. They're a little more hodgepodge on these. But Fajin Flurry is just a nice attack. Any deck that can put 3 extra speed on this somehow is going to get a momentum for free. Then you can play the EX3 and get another momentum refunded. And it's a 7 damage move that your opponent has to respect to some extent or another. So it's just a very good move to have. Creative Counter is a great block trick foundation. A couple good stat stick 2 difficulty foundations. One of them adds 3 damage, one of them adds 3 speed. They both have other abilities that help make momentum or replace momentum. Fourth Wheeler is kind of like that Ryu foundation where it fixes its own block zone, but it also does something within your stage, so that's a very, very good one. And Tattered Costume is a nice way to deal with both action cards and any sort of powerful Echo, Breaker, so long as it's on an attack card, specifically in Breaker's case, but it's a very good asset to have around, and there's a handful of other attacks and foundations in here that, you might not feel like you're using the whole buffalo, so to say, where there's, something about the card that you're not necessarily getting use out of, but, you look at what you do get, there's, a 3 low for 5 stun 2 attack in here somewhere that is a little wonky, but it does the job, and there's a couple other ones like that. So not really a bad pickup at all. If you want to get some, really, what could be the last MHA release for UVS. We haven't heard word of any more upcoming ones, but it's from the sort of Vigilante Deku arc. Number 2, Sam Rutherford. This is the only Star Trek Lower Decks deck on the list. This just has, it's Order Void, and it has a lot of just like uniquely tricky cards. Don't Do This is a great way to close out games. You can turn your extra cards into a chain of stun ones that can help, knock down your opponent's defenses and get you there. Shutdown is gaining popularity as a card to just disrupt your opponent's strings. They don't always have attacks that share keywords, but they very often will, even just by accident, even if not trying to. And being able to just take one of those attacks and say this one's not getting an enhanced step, which means it also doesn't get its blitz, can be very strong. As Attitude Selector and a couple other 1 difficulty spams that are okay in the right situations. Strange Energy, again, sometimes they'll be able to check the 7, but a lot of times this is going to be pretty disruptive for them. Just a nice hand trick to go ahead and cancel something. Betraying Shove is a good attack. Okie Dokie is one of the like 2 really good frenzy attacks we have right now, and does a little card filtering for you. The rest of the attacks are mostly fine to pretty good. They lean into this sort of tech theme. You can take these attacks as a package or some number of them and put them together in a deck and it'll be fine. Just not a lot of bad ones in this deck, really, is kind of the deal. There's not a lot in terms of big bombs, but just a lot of nice solid cards that you'll get out of this Sam Rutherford deck. And number 1 on the list, and this is from a bang for your buck angle, specifically, is the Jun Kazama Clash deck from Tekken 8. And notably, this is number 1 because it's a Clash deck, so it costs half as much. The cards in here are good, specifically the foundations. I like to say that, give or take a couple cards that specifically mention kicks and punches, you can pretty much take the foundations in this deck and use them as your foundation base for any deck on these symbols, just starting out, and it'll be fine. It's a lot of just nice, good, respectable, give you some stats, take a little speed away, give you some momentum, ready some foundations. The attacks are a little more fringy. I think Izumo's a pretty nice lead-in attack. Toss a 6 damage move at them and say, my next one's going to be big, you really want to block this one. That one's okay. The rest of them are kind of mediocre, but you can run them. They won't be disastrous or anything like that. And because this is a Clash deck, it is MSRP for, I believe, $15 instead of $35, and you can maybe find them for $12 to $15 or something like that. And you pick this up as a starting point for any good order or water deck. And that's going to be a wrap for our top 10 list. I did go through these kind of quickly, but wanted to just talk a little bit about each deck and, why I think they're decent pickups. And yeah, thanks for watching. For the next one of these, there's a couple more ideas for budget-themed videos I can do. I can do one on foundations, which is going to be kind of hard, because mostly every foundation's a budget foundation. There aren't too many non-budget foundations in the game. But I can highlight some quote-unquote staples or cards that see lots and lots of play that are like a common that you can pick up for one reason or another. Or I can do one on mostly normal rare attacks. A lot of normal rare attacks are like $1 or 50 cents or something like that, or even less. So there's can be some pretty good budget shopping to be had in there too. So drop a comment if you like this one, if there's any decks I left out that you think are really good pickups, or if you've tried one of these and you really like it, or that sort of thing. And let me know what your interest level is in these other couple of categories. I think my direct next couple of videos are going to be some box opening type stuff. We have a Turtles box open, and I'll generally pick a card out of each pack and kind of yap about it a little bit. Those run a little bit longer. It's going to be like a 40-minute video or something like that, because I just yap about 24 different cards kind of thing. And then I got some upcoming Trails TCG, the Kaseki video game series demo decks that I can try to record. Sort of a demo deck opening is a little bit weird to do, but I could probably do something like that. I like Trails enough that we can swing that. So those will probably be the next couple of videos before I get back to this budget series, and I'll link the previous budget video I did about sort of common and uncommon attacks in the description, and at some point I'll make a playlist out of these. And thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed this, and have a nice rest of your day.